Det er Trond Tveiten, og det er en produksjon for Trondpod Productions for Normal Norge i serien på høytid. Dette er episode nummer 5. I dag skal vi ta turen til Storbritannia, og vi skal snakke med tidligere politioffiser Neil Woods. Hello, Neil.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing great, and you?
Yes, good, thank you very much.
We've been all around the world. I've been talking about police officers in United States. I've been talking about Anne Sean, MI5. I've been talking to a man in Belgium, and now we're going back to Britain again, but this time a little different, because you have been an undercover cop in the war of drugs, haven't you?
Yeah, that's right. I did 23 years in the police, and over 14 of those years I worked undercover for much of the time, yes.
And where do you think the war on drugs stands now, from your perspective?
Well, I mean, if I go back to when I started as a police officer, I very much believe this sort of the thing that generally other people believe. I remember, I don't know if you perhaps picked up on this in Norway, I don't know, but Nancy Reagan on TV warning everyone that one smoke would crack cocaine and you'd be addicted for life. You know, I grew up with those kind of messages. And so during the work that I did, I came to different conclusions. I mean, I suppose one of the main reasons was I found that I was empathising with a lot of the people that I was being amongst, so to speak. So basically the work that I did was I used to try and infiltrate organised crime groups, gangsters, who would run the heroin and crack cocaine trade in inner city areas. And by doing that, I would sort of generally work from the bottom up, initially posing as a user, and then sort of working my way up, getting bigger and bigger weights to get to the middle management people. And that was the basis of it. So to do this, I would manipulate problematic drug users, and befriend them, manipulate them, and eventually persuade them to introduce me to people. But meeting some of these people and getting to know them very well, it became clear to me that rather than being criminals, these are people who just clearly needed help. And, you know, as representative of the state, I was making their life a lot worse. I was putting them at risk. They were getting prison sentences themselves. And, you know, that's bad enough, but I mean, I justified doing that at the time, because for me the end justified the means. You know, I was catching really bad people. I was catching the gangsters at the end. So, you know, the means were justified, so to speak. But then, as years go on, and you realise that the organised crime groups are getting more and more violent and intimidating whole communities more successfully, eventually I realised that the reason they were getting more violent was down to me. Or rather, not just me, but people like me. And I was very much involved in the development of tactics. And as the tactics develop, the police always have to get smarter. Then the natural pushback from organised crime is to become more violent, because that's the best way of protecting themselves against informants and other kind of police tactics. So when I realised that, then of course I look back on my career working undercover, and I realised that all of those things that I did, all the bad things that I did, and the people I put at risk, and the lives that I made more difficult, well, the end didn't justify the means at all. And so, you know, I look back on it really, and it's not just futile. I've caused immense harm, and for no benefit at all.
You provoked people. You make one law reveal. So you make a provocation to get people to commit crime. Am I right now, or?
Did I do what, sorry?
No. Oh, God, sorry. My English is not very good. You provoked some people to commit crimes in order to get more criminals.
Well, yes and no. I mean, they were all committing crimes already, so I wasn't an agent provocateur, as it were, because I didn't cause them to commit crimes that they wouldn't have otherwise committed. Okay. But I did put them at more risk, because, you know, over the years, gangsters made it quite clear that if someone was to introduce to them an undercover police officer, then they were going to be in serious trouble. So yeah, I was putting them at more risk, and also they were getting prison sentences where they're just trying to survive and deal with life. Especially as you think that problematic drug users, that especially for heroin use, are most of the time they are self-medicating for some kind of trauma in their lives. Yeah. So to actually increase that trauma by getting them sent to prison or bring them into the criminal justice system is just not only futile, it's sheer cruelty, really.
When were your turning point, really? On which time did you find out that this is messed up? When did you feel that first time?
Well, I did it in increments, really, sort of bit by bit, because I was very unsettled after a 6-month operation in the city of Leicester, for example, because I got to know some really, not just interesting people, but some really kind people as well. A lot of the problematic heroin users, they're just so kind and helpful to people they see as being in the same situation as themselves. There's some nice people. They might be spending their time shoplifting and just trying to scrape together as much money as possible with petty theft and things, but that shouldn't really be judged from that when they're just struggling to survive with trauma. So I was unsettled by it, but every operation I was tempted back into it, because they would say to me, Woodsy, we need you for this job because these gangsters are raping people for drug debt punishments, and they're getting worse. So I was always tempted back into it, but I suppose the final realisation was when I did an operation in Brighton. It was meant to be at least 6 months, and I only did it for 6 weeks because it was like a sort of fast forwarding of the future. It was a vision of the future and how bad things were going to get. Because the police there, I had been used to dealing with or working with very professional police officers, but the police in Brighton were very far from professional. They were quite obnoxious, actually, quite a sort of bullying canteen culture, and they had no regard for the drug users at all. They joked about having the highest drug deaths per capita in the UK, and they did for 7 years running. At that point, they got the highest amount of drug deaths. Now, it became clear to me from speaking to all of the street people there that there was a state of complete terror on the streets of, the underground element of the streets of Brighton. The street flotsam and the homeless people. They were terrified because the gangsters there were sort of using a single point of contact as their sort of proxy dealers, and they gave the instruction that if anyone else was brought near to them within view of them, then that proxy dealer would be killed.
Oh my God!
And that was the message that was out there from the gangsters. And they had organised crime groups coming from Birmingham and Liverpool, some considerable distance, because it was a very lucrative market. And they had the highest drug deaths. But if you asked any of the heroin users why there were so many high drug deaths, they would tell you it's because so many have been murdered by the gangsters to maintain their sort of control by fear. And from my point of view, this was not investigated properly. In fact, the police in Brighton that I was dealing with clearly had no care about that in the slightest, which from my point of view I see as neglectful.
They had a term in Norway called the Judas dose, when drug people are dying by an overdose, but if somebody else put the overdose, done the needle for them. It's like that, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was the suggestion. So that is certainly what a large number of people believed was happening, and that's quite an interesting term, Judas dose. Yeah,
that's no Oslo term, so it became a national term.
It's awful, but yes, that's exactly the kind of thing. I can't say that it definitely was, but what I can say is that with the high number of deaths combined with the high number of people who believed that was happening, then that should, in my mind, be investigated very thoroughly. That's sort of. I was also a ground cover detective. It's in conventional policing, and I used to be involved in murder investigations. So, to my mind and experience, that should have been treated very seriously indeed. But the truth of the matter is that problematic drug users are not cared about in the way that other citizens are. And certainly, to emphasise that point, here in the UK, we've had 3 years running, we've had the highest drug deaths on record.
Oh.
3 years in a row. And that's not prompted any government response or change of policy at all. In fact, only the other day, the government reiterated that it would be sticking to its same policy. So, to me, that only speaks of a lack of care. Something different needs to happen.
But it's the same if the Labour and the Conservatives really on the same page here?
Well, the trouble is, I get the impression it's the same in many countries around the world, but here, that they've spent a lot of time trying to outdo each other for who can be the toughest on drug policy.
Oh, God, yeah.
Just because it's easy for sound bites and it plays up to the sort of tabloid press. We have a very vocal tabloid press here who delight in misinformation in some quarters.
Yeah, I read The Sun. Yeah, it's an amazing newspaper.
Yeah.
It's very far from my reality, but it's a slogan there, like not like the British press, like it's someone else. But you cannot.
How is the press there? I mean, obviously, I take it the reputation of the British press has travelled, around. I spoke to people from other countries, and it seems to have that reputation. How is the press there in Norway?
Norway, we have God, I don't know what. The press always go in like a flock when it comes to pointing at some people at some time. So and then they are very afraid to take up controversial questions like this. So
Right.
so discussing a drug policy like legalization, if you're for legalization, you just are a selfish bastard who like to smoke joints. That is how the media sees here in Norway. They've been there for a very long time. There's some newspapers now who try to open that discussion a little, but it's very difficult. If you are if you're saying no to prohibition, the police will look at you, and the media will be critical against you. That is how it is in Norway. So it's not a dream situation here.
Right.
But you cannot be the only police officer in Britain who see this, who's on this page. Are there many people afraid to stand forward with views like you?
Well, it's interesting because I left the police in 2012, and I became sort of vocal in the public eye, campaigning for reform quite quickly. And because I was betraying some secrets of covert policing, I was seen as public enemy number one, really, in the covert policing world. I even had a very close friend in the police who was called into a senior police officer's office and given a lawful order to not have any further contact with me whatsoever, and she had to delete me from her phone and social media there on the spot. And so she's not even been allowed to tell me that, because she would have been disciplined if she had. Now, and that was designed to get at me, really. That was a punishment for me, I would suggest. But everyone sort of disowned me, so I had no contact at all with any people I knew or anyone in the police. Interesting, so that was a couple of years ago. Interestingly, since I published my book in August, which is called Good Cop, Bad War, I've had incredible amounts of support from serving police. Loads of people that I knew have sort of befriended me on Facebook, and I've had messages on Twitter. Loads and loads of support from serving police, and serving police who know that they're not meant to have contact with me as well. So I think that's really, really interesting, and hopefully a sign of things to come. I mean, I should perhaps explain that I'm from Leap UK. You obviously know about prohibition. So I'm the chairman of Leap UK. We have ex-chief constables. Obviously, you've mentioned Annie Machon. She's on our board. Yeah. We have barristers, magistrates, prison officers, prison governors. But they're all retired. We don't have any serving. But I hope that perhaps over the next 12 months or so we will start to get more involvement from serving police. And very interestingly, at the moment, we've just recently had some support from a police and crime commissioner
Oh.
which I don't know if you have an equivalent for this. It's someone who basically oversees how the police should operate, and basically sets the priorities for the policing area that he governs. And so there's the PCC called Arfon Jones, who covered North Wales. He's been tweeting in support of us, and he's actually been interviewed in his local newspaper, calling for heroin prescription, safe injection facilities, that kind of thing. So I mean, you can't get a much higher ranking police person than that in this country, really. So yeah, we're getting some interesting support at the moment, and things are very distinctly changing.
But why is this debate so hard to take? Because it's like every debate, you have pro and contra on every issue there is. But when it comes to drugs and legalization, it's only you are against it, or you are like a hippie, who like to use drugs. Why is the debate so divided in this question? No other debate is like this.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I would, to answer that, I would suggest that we need to look at the history of it. I mean, it was always a moral judgment, and a moral judgment and a declaration of war, like Nixon made, it relies on misinformation to perpetuate the idea of it. It's a moral judgment, and it's a prohibition with punitive measures. So it's reliant on propaganda. It's reliant on misinformation. So, and because of that, because that misinformation started in the 1970s, it's been compounded. People have grown up with misinformation and misunderstandings, and so it's sort of become culturally etched onto collective consciousness, hasn't it? And that's really difficult to get around. It's really difficult. So one of the principal things that we do, and a lot of reform organisations do when we advocate to politicians, is when we publicly advocate to politicians, is that we should have evidence-based policy for all things. Because, as you say, drug policy is that peculiar thing that it completely ignores the evidence. It merely follows a moral judgment. Sorry, go on.
No, because I read that thing. But a lot of people say that this is just also war against. I have to use the race issue, because in the 20s and 30s it was like they wanted to target black people who smoked cannabis, and even one of the advisors from Nixon said, they wanted to target the hippies and other groups like that.
Yeah, exactly, and that's only an extension of sort of earlier punitive measures as well. I mean, you look right back in the 30s to Anslinger. It's because he hated Mexicans. He was racist.
Yeah,
that's why in America they call it marijuana instead of cannabis, even to this day. And it's that cultural racism is absolutely written into even the language that they use now. But the trouble is with policing a moral judgment. So if you compare asking the police to police burglaries and thefts, the police officer is asked to investigate a burglary. So they follow evidence, they follow the facts, they follow the crime. There's no profiling in that. They're looking at the evidence, they look at intelligence about who's committing the crimes. It's all very clear. And it doesn't invite or invoke racism. However, if you ask police officers, like since the early 70s we have done, go and catch some drug users and drug dealers, it's a moral judgment. So the police officer has to look for who is this immoral person? Who are these people? And so that ekes out of the brain these cultural prejudices, which we all have. We all have cultural prejudice. But we're asking our police officers to do this, and it amplifies racism. So that's why in this country, I don't know what the figures are like where you are, but in the UK, if you are black, you are 6 times more likely to be searched for drugs than you are if you're white. 6 times more likely. I mean, that's a horrific figure. But that's because by asking to police drugs, this moral judgment amplifies and creates racism in our policing.
Yeah, in Norway, it's like for black people are complaining supposed to get stopped more than anyone else on every issue there is. So black people on a new bike, well, they can be one I talked with have been stopped by the police 10, 15 times. Had to ask the bicycle salesman to have evidence to him that he hadn't stolen it. It's like that in the Oslo police.
That sounds familiar. And yes, of course, there is racism in policing in a broader sense. But I would still argue that actually a lot of the cause of that racism is actually our punitive drug laws.
But also, I read a quote by Jimmy Carter, because when he was president, he tried to do something about it. But what happened? Because in the end of the Carter administration, what happened? Why didn't that come true?
Well, I mean, he was only in for 4 years, wasn't he?
Yeah.
That's the thing. And he had a lot to do. And near the end of his presidency, for various reasons, he wasn't actually that popular, was he? He was blamed for the hostage crisis and various other things. I think he could have been a more successful reformer, because it's clear that he believed. He's a very principled man, but I just think he had too much to do. And by the end of his, Reagan came in with an enormous wave of support. It was almost a revolution in right-wing neoliberalism, wasn't it? Really. Well, so I think with 4 years in America is not a very long time in politics, I'm afraid.
He said, "Therefore, I support legislation amending federal law to eliminate all federal criminal penalties for the possession of up to 28 grams of marijuana." That's one he thinks he would be saying during his presidency. A quote that's not very famous, but I found it. And I find it very strange. But Eisenhower always talked about the military-industrial complex. Could you talk about the same when it comes to drugs? Because there are a lot of people earning a lot of money to keep those laws today going.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thought. Are you suggesting that I mean, we often talk, at Leap UK, we often talk about how much money is going into the hands of organised crime. So, for example, in the UK, that's £7 billion a year. But are you suggesting that there is a sort of legitimate business interest in that there's some kind of...
I think more like an American term. When you have private prison, they need people to get incarcerated, and they're going to keep the military and police are getting more and more weapons to keep this war going on, and somebody's producing those weapons and so on. So it's like, I feel it's like more like a drug military complex, if we're going to call it like that.
Yeah, I think in the United States, I think that's an accurate way of looking at it, because of course the militarization of the police has just been getting worse and worse, hasn't it? And the thing that fuels that sort of escalation is the fact that they have the forfeiture orders, the laws where they seize money from people who they find just a gram of cannabis on someone, and they can seize their assets, and that actually gets churned back into buying more weaponry. So yeah, it is, as you say, it's an industrial sort of weaponization. It's like it's an arms race, and there's no chance of de-escalating it, is there? But I mean, that's not. But that is specific to the United States, I think, because I mean, here in the UK, there's no way the UK citizens would ever accept armed police, for example. We have less than 2% of our police actually carry guns. So
it's same in Norway too. We don't have guns on the police. They have it in the car, they have special permission to use it and so on.
Yeah.
One thing I want to take is the prison themselves. You put in people who just have a drug problem. It's like those prisons like a criminal school. They come in as addicted and go out like criminals. That has been a big case discussing in Norway, that you make criminals of harder criminals of people who are not hard criminals in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. It's counterproductive for so many reasons. And also, I remember in the 90s, I caught a couple who were big amphetamine sulfate dealers, and they had quite an amphetamine habit themselves, this man and woman. And they went to prison for... they got a 3-year sentence. They were selling that much. and there used to be quite big sentences in the 90s for amphetamine. And they both came out heroin addicts. They'd never even considered touching heroin before they went into prison. But to cope with the trauma of being in prison, heroin, I spoke with one of them afterwards, heroin just seemed like the best idea to cope with it. Which actually, might seem a daft thing to say, but that does make a lot of sense. So yeah, it's counterproductive when you look at people like that who you just made their lives much worse and made society far worse.
But also, I think every debate you have is like based on facts and numbers. I know we have a researcher in Britain called David Nutt. I would love to have on this show, but he haven't answered my mail yet. But when he got up with science about how dangerous drugs was, and he was sacked. Is it like that you cannot have alternative information who doesn't support status quo?
Yeah, that's probably the single best example, actually, of how horrendous the political situation is, because he literally used evidence, scientific evidence, to do a comparative study of drugs, and he was sacked. And I've read his. Have you read his book, Drugs Without the Hot Air?
No.
It's an incredible book. In there, he actually says that he had a conversation with the minister who sacked him, and who said, all I'm doing is comparing harms. And he says, yes, but you can't. The minister said, you can't compare harms with something that's illegal. And he said, well, why not? Because it's illegal, he said. So yeah, it's just inane and stupid approach from politicians that they have. It's insane. Have you ever seen the comparative study he did between the harms of MDMA and horse riding in the UK?
Yeah, he was here in Bergen and showed in the university. So yeah, I saw it. I was pretty shocked, really.
It's incredible, isn't it? You know, at the time that study came out, my kids were quite young. They were just getting into. Well, one of them was about to be a teenager, and seeing that about MDMA and horse riding, as a parent, I have to say I was really, really worried. Really worried that my kids would want to get into horse riding, because the statistics are terrifying. It's something like one in 350 horse rides with a child and in an accident which could be life changing. I mean, that's just absolutely terrifying. But we haven't banned it, have we?
No, we haven't. But there's a lot of things like the most argument I hear, like, yeah, we have to keep it illegal because it's illegal, and because it's illegal, it's the right to have it illegal.
Yeah, it's just how do you speak to people like that and get past that spiral?
Because I got a shock a few years. You have a big alcohol culture in Norway where people getting wasted like hell. It costs the society billions each year, and 10 years ago I started working as a security guard because I needed money. And then for the first time I was a little bit sober when I was dealing with these people. And really? People smoking cannabis a big problem, why people who's getting drunk in the weekends is not?
No, that's ridiculous. There's plenty of evidence to suggest actually that cannabis use reduces alcohol use.
Because every time I talk to people, like the cannabis people, don't do that, okay. And they listen to me, and you can get a conversation with the drunk people, never. So why do we keep alcohol like the big main thing? It costs the society billions a year. It's the biggest social cost in Norway each year. Alcohol.
It's the biggest cost here as well. But I'll tell you a story about one of our high-profile ecstasy deaths that will probably answer the question best. There's a famous MDMA death from in the early 90s when ecstasy got really big in the news, and it was I think she was 18 or 19, called Leah Betts. I don't know if you've heard of this. You probably won't.
No.
But she died, and it's linked to MDMA, possibly other drugs as well, but the press linked up, sort of got interested in the MDMA. And the parents allowed the photograph of her on the life support machine to be used in the press. Now, a few weeks after her death, right across the UK, these posters started appearing on all the bus stops. This massive 6-foot-high poster of Leah Betts on life support. And it was this poster warning people not to take ecstasy. Now, you would think, a big poster campaign like that, was it by the government, maybe? Some kind of information thing? But it wasn't. It was paid for by the drinks industry, by the alcohol industry.
Wow, you're not kidding.
I think that's incredible, isn't it? And it's because at the time in clubs, alcohol consumption in young people was going down because of the increase in MDMA use. So yes, okay, no drugs are completely safe, and MDMA can be a risk. Some people occasionally do die, but it's substantially safer than alcohol. And in this country, we have 8,500 acute alcohol deaths each year. That's not long-term deaths. I'm talking overdoses of alcohol. 8,500, and yet the press literally cover every MDMA death, which we might get 10 in a year, but they'll cover each one will be in the newspaper.
Every Monday in Bergen, you have the police, an article called the police log of what happened during the weekend, and I felt like 9 to 10 of those logs are based on alcohol use. People are fighting. People are throwing things at each other. They are fighting with the police. They're doing everything like talking bad to the police and approach women in not very good manners, and so on. 9 of 10 of alcohol. No one I read about cannabis. The time they take cannabis is like they stop 2 people who were sitting and playing a guitar or doing something else while smoking.
Yeah.
But that little case of those people playing get all the attention, but all the alcohol shit nobody talks about.
Yeah, and domestic violence as well. This is one of the worst factors for an increase in domestic violence, as many studies will show. Alcohol, that is.
But why are you so afraid of it? Why are you so afraid of cannabis when people just want to use something different to calm themselves down? Why?
Well, misinformation, I would say. It's all down to the propaganda. It's easy, certainly here, it's easy to sell newspapers by having scare stories about such things. And also, it might be used by a large proportion of society, but it's still the minority. And unfortunately, there is still a predatory sort of aspect to the culture in society, isn't there? People are scared of the other people they don't understand.
We're going to talk a little bit about LEAP, because this is an organization started in the United States, and now you are part of the board in Britain now. Am I correct?
Yes, that's right. It started in the United States, which I think is fair enough, because it's the United States which lumbered us with this war on drugs in the first place. So I think it's quite apt that one of the most important organisations that trying to end it actually started over there.
But talk a little bit about LEAP UK, how you work, what people how you were working. Because I talked a lot about the United States version, but how do you in Britain work with it?
Well, I mean, we've been around for a few years, but we grew enough so that in February this year we launched in the Houses of Parliament, and we had some people from the States. You've interviewed Peter, haven't you, from Belgium?
Yeah, Peter Mutual, yeah.
Yeah, so we had Peter there as well, speaking for us in the House of Parliament. We had Annie, we had Johan Hari. We had loads of people. It was really good. It was well covered in the press. And so, in terms of how we function, the most important thing we do is we're media facing.
Yeah.
We get interviews in the media about the subject matter. A fair amount. We get lots of radio coverage, bits and bobs of newspaper. And we're growing all the time in reputation. We also have the podcast, the Stop and Search podcast, which you've interviewed Jason, haven't you? Jason Reed in the past.
Yes, I have.
So his podcast is fabulous, and that's gaining audience all the time. And we have some fascinating people on there. We really do. So that's an important part of what we do. And speaking events as well. So next year, I'm doing speaking at a conference in Poland.
Oh.
In Prague. So Poland in February, Prague in March. Also in February, I'm speaking in Gibraltar. South Africa in July. So I'm getting around and doing plenty of speaking events. So if anyone's listening and wants me to come and speak over there, it's I do like to be invited to different places. So,
well, you're very welcome to Norway. We're gonna find a spot for you and try to get it organized. But we are working against. It's like in Norway, a lot of people mean this, but they're afraid to come forward.
Yeah, I mean, the useful thing I bring, I think, is the fact that I used to be an undercover cop, so I can tell some stories which interest people, thankfully, and that's how I get an audience to come and listen generally. But in the UK we have another, as vice chair, we have another ex-undercover cop called Suzanne Sharkey, and her story is absolutely fascinating because for a couple of years she used to work the same kind of thing as me, but she also was a drug user, and she lost her job. She ended up having such a problem that she ended up getting arrested. She woke up in a police cell a couple of times. She ended up being homeless, and now she's in recovery, and she's founded this charity called Recovering Justice. But she's also a board member of Leap UK, and she's a fantastic speaker. So she'll be doing lots of speaking events through next year. We have ex-chief constables as well, and obviously Annie does lots of speaking events around Europe. So yeah, our profile is growing, and we've got lots of interesting people to bring in an audience. So that's what we're doing in the UK. It's just a matter of building profile, and bit by bit, the more varied places you can speak, then that brings in more social media. It spreads the word, and we all know we're in it for the long game. It's going to take a long time and a lot of hard work to bring about change, but this is the way you do it. You build your audiences bit by bit. So yeah.
Which countries do you think is going in the right direction now here in Europe?
In Europe, I think the most interesting one is Ireland.
Yeah.
Because considering they're a very conservative country in terms of their religious out. It's fascinating that, for start, they voted by a referendum to approve gay marriage.
Yeah, I remember that. That was a...
That's incredible because it goes against the doctrine of the traditional ethos of the state.
Yeah, that was the old Catholic country where the priests come from, wasn't it?
Exactly. So, and there is a parallel with those kind of social reforms. I think it's very important. So, and that social movement was very much young people, and so the drug law reforms is very much being driven there by young people active on social media, and so this has prompted a minister to consider safe. Well, they are going to bring in safe injection facilities. I think one has opened already. So, and they're talking about heroin assisted treatment. They're talking about decriminalisation. They're probably one of the next countries to do that. But what's important there is it's quite a small population, so swings can come very quickly. So they're the exciting one for me, and I'd like to get speaking there. But I mean, obviously, other countries like the Czech Republic, decriminalisation, Portugal's decriminalisation, but decriminalisation on itself concerns me a little bit because there doesn't seem to have been any movement in Portugal towards regulation. And decriminalisation is great because no one should go to jail for taking drugs, obviously, but it doesn't end the problem with the criminal organised crime. Oh. You still got gangsters corrupting the system and killing people. We need to stop that. So I don't know. I mean, what do you think? Is there any other areas in Europe that you think is particularly interesting?
Yeah, I would talk about, because in Norway we have how we organize sales of alcohol in Norway is like we have a state monopoly who take high taxes on sales of wine and liquor and so on. It's only states own shops. So that's why I got into organizing, because I want to ask you, how would you regulate it if you legalize drugs? Can that be a model? Like,
well, actually, I really like that. I didn't know that. I didn't know you had that system.
No, Norway and Sweden has it. Like, the own state shop is for the liquor, and everything is stronger than the wine.
I like that because that gives government an element of control over pricing and other ways of regulation which can reduce harms. Our system for alcohol here is very poor indeed. It's under-regulated. I've just seen it today in the supermarket that you can buy 3 crates of cider cheaper than you can buy 2 crates as an offer. You know, the sort of financial encouraging people to buy more booze is just so horrendous. But so yeah, I think that would be a very good model. I mean, that's it's essentially the model that Uruguay is going to be adopting for cannabis. I don't think that could ever be brought in. That would never be politically viable in this country because we have too much of a capitalist agenda right across the political parties. So whilst I believe it would be a good model for cannabis, I think what is more likely to happen in the UK is more of a libertarian influence on a sort of free market element to cannabis regulation, which, you know, although a state-run model would be my ideal personally, because it's the best way to control the quality and to reduce harms. I think what is more likely to happen here is a more capitalist model. So, but you know, I'd take that over the current model any day.
Yeah, because in Norway, commercialing for alcohol is banned too. So you're not legal to put commercial on your products. That is also an effect. But you had an election in the United States. Now, it's 2 parts of that I wanted to ask. And what effect do you think the new administration in the White House will have on the drug laws? Because you have a legalization in many states now. Will that go of a setback now?
Oh God, yeah, that is the question, isn't it? I really do not know at all. I don't think anyone knows. I mean, there's plenty of incredibly worrying signs with some of the people that he's appointing over there in the States, and they really could do an enormous amount of damage. I mean, for example, if the federal government decided to attack the finances of all of the commercial models or all the people involved in the commercial supply of cannabis in the legalized states, they could completely wreck all of the progress that's been made. I hope that it's gone too far to actually wheel back, and I would hope that because of the polling in all of the states like Colorado, since it's happened, have been so positive, people are supporting it in increasing numbers where it's happened. So that hopefully would indicate that it's gone too far to reverse. But I don't know. I mean, Trump's just the most unpredictable politician of our lifetime, isn't he? So in the West, anyway. So I really don't know. I mean, I think the great one to look to, actually, that's more important for us in the UK anyway, is Canada.
Yeah.
Because politicians here have had no interest. Policymakers here, when we've been meeting with them, we've said, look what's happening in Colorado. They had no interest at all in that. But since Canada voted in Trudeau, we've had different conversations with policymakers. They very much have their eye on it. And one of the main reasons for that, of course, is that Justin Trudeau campaigned on it. It was one of his major campaign messages, and he won. He came from third place to first place. So that is making our policymakers sit up and take notice. And also, of course, he's being very careful about it. It's all about public health and reducing harm. So that's the one that's going to be a game changer for many governments, I think. And that's going to be the best evidence of people like me, whose full-time job is doing this.
I just have to ask a question. I asked Anna Michon the same, because the Trump wall is fascinating. Will the Trump wall stop the drug for coming into the United States? I already know the answer, but I just need to hear it from a former police officer.
Oh God! I mean, yeah. If the wall ever happens, it will stop the flow of nothing between the border of Mexico and the United States. It's a ridiculous idea. I mean, you can't keep drugs out of prisons.
No.
An enormous wall across the state line between two nations is not going to make the slightest bit of difference. It's it's a farcical concept, isn't it? It's this great delusion that's perpetuated that we can actually stop the supply of drugs at all in any way.
It's like listening to the nationalistic people in Norway. If you just get rid of all of Pakistanis and foreigners, we will stop the drug trade in Norway because they are doing it today.
Oh God! Yeah, people need to realise the simple truth about drugs is you cannot reduce the demand. It's that simple. Once people grasp that, then the rest falls into place. Really,
it's like a comedy I saw on TV that you don't have to push drugs; the drug pushes itself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But how do you think the world would look like without those narcotic laws? Because you as a police would have a lot of time to do something else.
Well, I mean, I think we would go through a societal change, and we would have to sort of how do you call it? That there would have to be a lot of peacemaking, because there's been a lot of divisions created in communities, and there's a lot of damage between communities and policing, and those wounds have got to be healed. But we can only start to heal them once we end punitive measures for drugs and take drug policing, end the policing of drugs. But I think just generally, without the constant rhetoric and constant propaganda and the stigma, because once you end the criminalisation, then the stigma will start to end, and then surely as societies will become more caring. If we are less hostile to a group of people and the stigma is reduced, then that's just going to be better for society all round, really.
I'm jumping a little bit back and forward in this interview, but in Norway we had it looked like a lot of cases when it comes to domestic violence was not investigated because we didn't have the time to do so. Wouldn't that now? Did you have the same problem in Britain? And would that change with the illegalization of drugs?
Well, absolutely, definitely, because actually in the UK, the single biggest cost to policing is actually drugs investigation. It's around £7 billion a year. The same money as that goes into the hands of organised crime.
7 billion?
7 billion, yeah. We spend more on policing drugs than anything else. It's extremely expensive. And so there's whole policing areas like County Durham have publicly said, and if you heard of Ron Hogg, he's the PCC for County Durham here, he's publicly said that we are no longer prioritising cannabis because the money is best spent elsewhere.
Wow.
And he didn't actually get as much flack in the newspapers as you would expect for that.
No.
And also he's got the results because of all the constabularies. I think there's 43 police areas here, constabularies, and they're all measured. How good they are, and they are measured. The measures are sort of okay, good, and outstanding. And Durham is the only police area that got outstanding in all measures, and that was after 12 months of that policy where he has been using resources for other things, for things that actually cause social harm, and that includes domestic violence. So yes, the answer to your question is there is actually clear evidence that where policing goes away from drugs and the resources go elsewhere, then there is a better outcome for communities. The evidence is there.
What do you want message in the end there? What do you want to say to the Norwegian police? Because I had I'm board member in Norway, and we had some problem because a few months ago I was called up by a police officer who was angry with me because I wrote in the newspapers. So it's a little bit strange here. What do you want to say to the Norwegian police who feel agree with you but not dare to come forward?
Yeah, well, I would say that it's very tempting for police to say that they must remain apolitical and just merely carry out the laws of the land in an apolitical way. And for most of the time, that's correct. But if you have come to the conclusion that the policy in which you are asking to police is actually causing harm, then I would say please consider that it's your duty to do something about that. And so that's the conclusion. It took me a long time to come to the conclusions that I did. I wish I'd come to them earlier. But once having come to those conclusions, I see myself as duty bound to do something about that. Because we go into the police service we accept duty, and we want to do the right thing. We want to protect people. We want to keep the peace. We want to protect people's life and property. These are all the things the police officer should do. But if you realise that if you are part of a system which is actually harming people, then that's where duty transcends what the law says, I would say. Now, I know that's very difficult to actually act on that, but at least you can do is to honestly debate it and honestly raise that conversation, because every police officer should realise they are listened to and respected when they say something. And so you could start a quiet revolution just by being brave enough to speak out, I would say.
Well, Neil Woods are coming out with a book now called Good Cop, Bad War.
Good Cop, Bad War. Yes.
Yeah, you can buy it on Amazon in paper, in an audiobook and paperback and everything. I recommend that book for everybody. This was Tron Podcast, in Tron Pod Productions. This was thank you, Neil Woods.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on.
So, till next time, have a good day.